Hello, today I'm going to be covering the case of Robert Andrew Berdella. And just a disclaimer, this case does involve mentions of drug abuse, and it is really, really gory, and it's a really hard case to hear. So, just a little trigger warning. And just a quick little disclaimer, I don't want to offend anyone, any of the victims' families. This is just research that I have done on this case, and I feel like this case needs more recognition. So, I mean no harm to anyone. This is just information that I found online, and I just want to share this case. So, Robert Andrew Berdella was born in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio in January 31st, 1949. Cuyahoga Falls is described as one of the safest places to live in Ohio. Cuyahoga is the standard suburb, and the time this case took place, the population was about 29.2 thousand. Robert's family consisted of his mother, Mary Berdella, who was a homemaker, his father, Robert Berdella Sr., who worked as a die setter in the Ford Motor Company. And if you don't know, a die setter is just someone who prepares machine and production tools. And finally, Robert had a brother named Daniel, who was 7 years younger than him. The Berdella family was extremely religious and regularly attended church. Robert wasn't fond of this religious lifestyle and stopped going to church altogether in his teens. Robert was severely nearsighted, and due to this, he had to wear glasses with thick lenses. And I'm not sure if you guys know, but whenever glasses have thick lenses, it can kind of like distort your face and make your eyes look unproportional to your face. And Robert was bullied for this at his school, and he spent most of his time without having any friends, and he was pretty much a loner. And his teachers described him as, quote, difficult to teach, but overall he was still considered a good student. Robert was not a stereotypical teenage boy in the sense that he had little to no interest in sports. And as Robert grew older in his teens, he began to discover himself and realized that he was homosexual, but decided to keep it to himself, and he didn't tell anyone for a while. Robert also began to develop a negative attitude that was really just targeted towards women. Robert's father died of a heart attack on Christmas Day, 1965. Soon after this sudden tragedy, Robert's mother got remarried, and obviously for any child, it's hard enough to deal with a parental figure just leaving, and especially just suddenly dying like that. And especially for his mother to get remarried so soon, this took a toll on Robert, and he began to dislike his mother because of this. Robert continued his independent lifestyle and spent his days painting and writing to pen pals. Robert graduated from Cuyahoga Falls High School in 1966 with exceptional grades, and he was even enrolled into an independent study program. In hopes of becoming a teacher or just getting a career in teaching, Robert began to attend Kansas City Art Institute. But this didn't work out, and instead, Robert became a chef. While in art school, Robert did take place in the torturing of animals on 3 different occasions and was suspended due to these incidents. Soon after this suspension, Robert became an alcoholic and started selling drugs. Robert's cooking career took off though, and he was a successful full-time chef. He even became a respected member of his community and joined the South Hyde Park Crime Prevention and Neighborhood Association. At this point in time, Robert had come to terms with his sexuality and began befriending male prostitutes and drug addicts and urging them to take a different path in life. However, many of these men didn't really want to change the way that they were living, and this really ticked off Robert because he was loaning these men money, a home to live in rent-free, and was engaging in sexual activities with them. Age 32, Robert quit being a chef and opened a store at a flea market called Bob's Bazaar Bazaar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And unfortunately, this business was not as profitable as Robert had hoped, and he resorted to scavenging and stealing items. On July 5th, 1984, Robert took the life of his first of 6 victims. Robert had promised his first victim, named Jerry Howell, a ride to a dancing contest in Merriam, Kansas. Robert had offered Jerry alcohol drugged with Valium and aspirin, and after Jerry had fallen unconscious from these drugs, Robert injected him with a tranquilizer and tied him to his bed. Howell was binded to Robert's bed for a total of 28 hours, and in this time frame, Robert proceeded to rape, drug, torture, and penetrate Jerry with foreign objects. Tragically, Howell passed away after choking to death on his own vomit. Berdella then dragged Jerry's deceased body into his basement, hung him above a large pot, and made slits in his elbows and jugular vein before leaving Howell's corpse to be drained of blood. The day after the body was drained, Robert then proceeded to dismember Jerry's body with a chainsaw and knives. After Jerry was fully dismembered, Robert packed the body parts into garbage bags and newspaper. He then stuffed these assorted wrapped body parts into a larger trash bag that he then left outside to just be collected by garbage men. When questioned, Berdella denied all involvement in Howell's disappearance and told the police that he had just taken him to the dancing contest and had not seen or spoken to him after this interaction. Robert went on to commit an additional 5 brutal murders. On April 12, 1985, Berdella claimed his next victim, Robert Sheldon. Sheldon had been staying with Robert and had to pay rent because Robert was not attracted to him, which just makes me very upset because Robert was saying that he was trying to help these men, but if he's not getting any sexual gratification out of it, he doesn't really care about their well-being. So, Berdella had arrived home to Sheldon in a drunken state and saw him as an opportunity to, quote, express some of the anger and frustration that I had toward other people on, which is just a really sorry excuse. Robert gave Sheldon sedatives and kept him in his second-floor bathroom after he had fallen unconscious. Robert had inflicted unthinkable injuries upon Sheldon, including sticking needles under the tips of his fingers, pouring sealant into his ears, and tying his wrists together with piano wire. 72 hours later, Berdella suffocated Sheldon with a sack and rope. He then dismembered his body in the bathroom. The June after this murder, Robert discovered Mark Wallace in his tool shed in an attempt to take cover from a storm. Berdella had opened his home to Mark and offered to inject him with a sedative to, quote, calm him down. Wallace agreed, and Robert held him captive in his bedroom. Mark went through an entire day of merciless torture, which consisted of being injected with hypodermic needles in the muscles in his back and repeatedly electrocuted with alligator clips that were attached to his nipples. Wallace passed away on June 23rd on 7 p.m. from a mixture of the drugs in the needles and a lack of oxygen. The rest of Robert's victims included James Ferris, Todd Stoops, Larry Wayne Pearson, and Christopher Bryson, who had actually successfully escaped Robert's clutches by jumping out of a second-story window. All of these men were also killed and tortured in the most savage ways imaginable, including electric shocks, hypodermic needles, and breaking bones with metal rods, and that wasn't even all of it. Christopher Bryson, the man who had escaped Robert, was rushed to a hospital and treated for his wounds, and after he had recovered, Bryson was brought in for further questioning at the Kansas City Police Department. Bryson reported enduring 4 days of torture and sexual abuse. Christopher had also told police of the Polaroid pictures Robert kept of his past victims, and Robert had told him that these men were his sex slaves, and that if Bryson had made any attempt to leave or escape from him, that would result in either more horrendous torture or even death. Police had immediately arrested Robert for the sexual abuse to Christopher Bryson, and upon the search of Berdella's home, they discovered a horrifying sight that seemed like something out of a horror movie, like it didn't even seem real. Investigators uncovered the rope that Bryson had said he was bound with, as well as small bottles filled with drugs, syringes, belts, eye drops, and swabs. Shockingly, investigators had made an even more sinister discovery. They had uncovered multiple human vertebrae with obvious saw marks, envelopes with human teeth in them, and even a decomposing human head in Berdella's backyard. Initially, in his sentencing, Robert had pleaded not guilty to the murders, but decided to come up with a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. Berdella had then gone on to confess to all 6 murders and give gory details about how he had tortured and killed these men. Robert was then found guilty of all 6 of these murders and received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. And just a disclaimer, different sources gave different facts about his sentencing, but for most sources, I saw that he received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. While incarcerated, Robert complained of chest pains and was transferred to a hospital in Columbia, Missouri. On October 8th, 1922, Robert Berdella was then pronounced dead, and his cause of death was a heart attack, and he was aged 43. And that is the case of Robert Andrew Berdella. He was a absolutely sick and twisted man, and my hearts go out to all of the victims and their families. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.